My name is Henry. Folks around here just call me Grandpa Henry now, and I don't mind it one bit. The truth is, the older you get, the more you realize that titles and names don't matter nearly as much as the stories people remember about you. And I've got plenty of stories. Some good, some bad, some that still wake me up in the middle of the night with a pounding heart. This particular story, though, is one I never thought I'd be the one to tell. It isn't about my own mistakes or my own victories. It's about my daughter, and about the man she chose to bring into our lives. Now, you should know something about me. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I spent decades working in insurance, which means I've seen the way numbers can tell the truth people try to hide. I learned how to trust paper trails, signatures, receipts, and reports, because people lie, but numbers, they don't. Numbers are brutally honest. That's why, when my daughter Rebecca walked into my kitchen one bright Sunday morning, carrying blueberry muffins and that nervous smile of hers, I noticed before she even said a word that something was weighing on her. She set the muffins down, kissed me on the cheek, and poured herself a mug of coffee. She sat there for a long time, wrapping her hands around the cup, like she was bracing for the cold. "Dad," she finally said, "Evan and I found a house. It's perfect for us. But the bank says we need a co-signer. Could you help us?" Now, if you've ever had a daughter, you know exactly what that moment feels like. Your heart wants to say yes before your head even catches up. You'd give your life for her, so what's a signature? Just a few strokes of ink. But the problem is, I know better. I know that a signature isn't just ink. It's trust. It's your name tied to someone else's choices, someone else's debts, someone else's future. And once you give away, you can't take it back. Evan, her fiancé, I'd met him plenty of times by then. Polite, charming, always the right word at the right time. Call me sir, like he was raised in the 1950s. And yet, every time he shook my hand, I felt something was missing. His grip was firm but not honest. His smile was wide but not warm. The kind of man who practices in the mirror before stepping into the room. I didn't answer Rebecca right away. I leaned back in my chair, looked at her, then at Evan, and I said, "Before I make any decisions, I'd like to see his credit report." That's when I saw it, a flicker in his eyes. It was quick, so quick you might have missed it if you weren't paying attention. But I've lived long enough to know what guilt looks like when it tries to hide. His smile faltered for just a moment, then snapped back into place like a mask he couldn't afford to drop. And right then I knew something wasn't right. And before I go further, let me pause for just a moment. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, real-life letters about love, betrayal, trust, and the choices that shape families, go ahead and subscribe to Grandpa Henry's Letters. It helps me keep sharing these moments, and maybe you'll see something of your own life reflected in mine. Now, back to that Sunday morning. Rebecca looked at me like she expected me to argue, to push back. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just said what I meant. "I'll need to see the report." Evan nodded, forced another smile, and promised he'd send it over. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, the way he shifted in his seat. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole conversation gnawed at me. You know how your mind replays things over and over again? The look on his face. The way Rebecca avoided eye contact when she asked. The fact that he hadn't been the one to bring it up himself, but instead leaned on her to do the asking. So I got up, poured myself another cup of coffee, even though it was nearly midnight, and I sat at the computer. I pulled up the forms, filled in the details, and requested the credit report myself. When the file came through, my hands actually trembled. I didn't want to open it. Part of me hoped I'd been wrong all along, that my instincts had dulled with age. But the other part of me, the part that had been through wars, funerals, and heartbreak, that part knew I wasn't wrong. I clicked the file, and the moment I started reading, I felt my stomach turn to stone. This wasn't just a few late payments. It wasn't just a mistake, or two. It was something much darker. And that's where the story truly begins. The morning Rebecca asked me to co-sign wasn't the first time Evan had sat across from me at that old oak table. No, by then. I'd already seen him enough times to form an opinion, or at least a trusty unease that settled in my gut every time he shook my hand. Evan was the kind of young man who played his part well. He dressed neatly, never too casual, never overdressed. His hair was trimmed short, his shoes always polished. He brought wine once, flowers another time. He said the right things, laughed at the right jokes. On the surface, he was polite, respectful, the sort of man any father would be relieved to see courting his daughter. And yet, for all his polish, I never saw sincerity in his eyes. They were eyes that measured, eyes that calculated, eyes that weighed what a room could give him instead of what he might give to the room. Still, Rebecca loved him, and love has a way of painting even the sharpest corners in softer tones. She looked at him the way her mother once looked at me, as though the world might tilt off its axis if he wasn't standing there to steady it. That was the part that made me hold my tongue more than once. It wasn't my place to dismantle her happiness with suspicions I couldn't yet prove. Love has to be tested in its own fire, and no warning from me would keep her from stepping into the flames if she was determined. So when she asked me to co-sign, it wasn't just a favor she was asking for. It was a test, not of her love for Evan. She had already proven that, but of my trust in her judgment. A test I wasn't eager to take. I remember looking at her, really looking, as she spoke. Her hands trembled slightly against the coffee mug. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried that flicker of worry, the kind a person has when they already know the answer might be no. She wanted me to be proud of her, to support her, to hand over not just my signature, but my approval to life she was building. But I couldn't ignore that whisper inside me, the same whisper that had guided me my whole life, the one that warned me when a deal sounded too good, when a handshake lingered too long, when silence said more than words. That whisper told me to pause, to breathe, to think before I leapt. So I said the only thing I could. Let me see the credit report first. The room went quiet after that. Rebecca looked stunned, like she hadn't expected me to hesitate. And Evan smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was too quick, too practiced, and it disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. He nodded and said, "Of course, sir. I'll get it to you right away." But his voice carried something brittle, something that cracked beneath the surface. Rebecca broke the silence. "Dad, it's just a formality. He has steady income, and the house is well within budget. The bank just wants reassurance." I reached across the table, put my hand over hers, and said gently, "Sweetheart, a co-signature is never just a formality. It's my name, my promise. If anything goes wrong, they don't come after him. They come after me. That's not something I can give lightly." Her eyes dropped to the table. I could see the disappointment there, the silent plea that I would just say yes, trust her choice, and let her chase the dream she wanted. I wanted to give her that more than anything. But fatherhood doesn't end when your children grow up. It changes shape, but it never disappears. And in that moment, I wasn't just her father. I was the gatekeeper to a decision that could alter the rest of her life. I excused myself, walked into the kitchen, and let the tap run cold as I splashed water on my face. My reflection in the window showed an old man, weary but firm. I knew the path I was taking would strain things between us. But love, real love, isn't about keeping the peace at all costs. Sometimes it's about standing in the way of a storm, even when your child resents you for blocking the path. When I returned, they were both quiet. Evan looked calm again, but his foot tapped against the floor under the table, a rhythm too sharp to be nerves alone. Rebecca tried to smile, but her eyes were glassy. I sat back down and said, "Bring me the report. We'll talk after that." My voice was steady, final. The conversation was over, though the consequences had only just begun. That was the request. Simple on the surface. But beneath it was the beginning of a fracture that would split open everything we thought we knew. After they left that Sunday afternoon, the house felt heavier. It's strange how a place you've lived in for decades can shift its weight depending on what lingers in the air. Their laughter faded from the kitchen. The front door clicked shut, but the unease stayed behind, echoing off the walls like a stubborn draft. I sat back down at the oak table, staring at the two empty mugs still sitting there. Rebecca's lipstick faintly marked the rim of hers. Evan's, untouched, still half full of coffee that had already gone cold. That told me plenty. A man too restless to drink his coffee is a man carrying something on his mind. I've always believed in gut feelings. Some folks call it instinct, others call it paranoia. But I've lived long enough to know the difference. Instinct whispers. Paranoia screams. This wasn't paranoia. This was that soft, steady whisper I'd learned never to ignore. I walked into the living room and sat in my old chair, the one that had molded itself to my frame after years of reading newspapers and watching ball games. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and thought about Evan, about the way his jaw had clenched when I asked for the credit report, about the way his smile faltered, then snapped back into place like a rubber band. Rebecca was too much like her mother, full of trust, soft at the edges, always ready to believe the best in people. Linda, God rest her soul, once let a neighbor borrow our lawnmower. He promised to return it the next morning. Took 3 months and a dozen excuses before I got it back. Blade rusted and handle bent. I told Linda we'd been taken advantage of. She just smiled and said, maybe he needed it more than we did. I loved her for that kindness, but it cost us plenty over the years. I swore after she passed that I'd be the shield Rebecca didn't know she needed. And now, that promise sat heavy on my shoulders. I thought back to times I'd ignored my own instincts. There was a business deal years ago, a client with a flashy smile, a gold watch that caught the light, and a voice like honey. Everything in me screamed to walk away. But the numbers looked decent, and I ignored the unease. 6 months later, he vanished with $500,000 of company money, and my name was dragged to the mud until I cleared it. It nearly ended my career. That lesson carved itself deep into me. Instincts matter. Evan had that same shine. Smooth words, polished surface, but no weight beneath it. I'd seen his kind before, and I wasn't about to let my daughter gamble her future on charm and empty promises. That evening, Rebecca called me. "Dad," she said, her voice a mix of hope and fear. "Thank you for not saying no right away. Evan really wants this house. It's close to my office, has a little garden in the back. It feels like home already." I closed my eyes, picturing her there. I wanted that for her. God, I wanted it. But not at the cost of shackling her to a man hiding his truths. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said softly. "Let's just wait for the report." She hesitated. Evan thinks you don't trust him. I didn't respond right away. The truth was too sharp, too raw. Finally, I said, "Trust is earned, Rebecca, not handed out like sugar packets at a diner." She was quiet after that. I could almost hear her heart tightening through the phone. That night, I walked the halls of my house, restless. Each picture frame along the wall told a story. Rebecca as a baby in her mother's arms, Rebecca on her first bike, Rebecca in her graduation gown. Every step reminded me of how much I had already given to protect her, to raise her, to make sure she had a chance in this world. And now some man thought he could waltz in, smile wide, and use her love as a shield for his mistakes. No, not on my watch. The decision formed itself without me even realizing. I wasn't going to wait for Evan to hand me a polished version of his history. I'd get the truth myself. I still had contacts in the mortgage world, old friends who owed me favors, people who understood that sometimes protecting family meant bending the rules just a little. I sat at my desk, pulled open a drawer where I kept important papers, and set aside Rebecca's birth certificate, my will, a stack of old letters. Beneath it all was my notebook, black leather, pages yellow with age, where I kept names and numbers of men I trusted. I flipped to the one I needed, David Morales, a mortgage broker I'd known for 30 years. The kind of man who still believed a handshake meant something. I picked up the phone, dialed his number, and when he answered, I said simply, "David, I need a favor." Quietly, he listened as I explained, his silence heavy but not judgmental. When I finished, he said, "Henry, you know this is exactly by the book." "I know," I replied, "but it's for Rebecca." That was all it took. He sighed, then said, "Send me the details. I'll see what I can do." As I hung up the phone, a strange calm settled over me. The whisper inside had grown louder, clearer. I was no longer just suspicious. I was certain. Something about Evan wasn't right, and soon enough, I'd have the proof in my hands. I poured myself a whiskey, sat by the window, and watched the night settle in. Outside, the streetlights flickered and the world went quiet. But inside, my resolve hardened. I would find the truth, even if it meant breaking my daughter's heart to save her future. The report didn't arrive right away. Bureaucracy never does move fast, even when you've got a friend pulling strings. But 2 days later, just as I was trimming the hedges out front, my phone buzzed with a message from David. "It's in. Sending to your email. Call me before you read it." That last part gave me pause. Call him before I read it? That wasn't his style. David was a man who dealt in numbers, cold and clean. If he wanted to talk before I laid eyes on the report, it meant there was something in there worth cushioning. I set the hedge clippers down, wiped the sweat off my brow, and walked inside. My laptop sat on the kitchen table, the same table where Rebecca had asked me to co-sign just days earlier. It felt fitting that the truth would land here, too. I dialed David before opening the file. He picked up on the first ring. "Henry," he said, and I could hear the weight in his voice. "Are you sure you want to see this?" I chuckled dryly. "David, I've read casualty reports from wars, autopsy files, and insurance claims that'd make your stomach turn. I think I can handle a credit report." He sighed. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you." When the file finally opened, my eyes scanned the first page, and my stomach dropped. Late payments. Collections. 3 credit cards closed for default. An auto loan marked voluntary surrender, which is a nice way of saying repossessed. I flipped to the next page. A civil judgment. Fraud. $8,000 owed to a former roommate who had taken him to court. The next page. Eviction proceedings. 2 years back. Non-payment of rent. And then, buried halfway through the document, something that chilled me to the bone. A second name. Same social security number, same birth date, but filed under an alias. He'd applied for credit cards under it. Open accounts, all tied to an address across town I'd never heard him mention. I sat back in my chair, the report trembling in my hands. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't the story of a man who fell on hard times. This was a pattern, a deliberate one. A man who built a house of cards and expected everyone else to hold it steady while he smiled from the front porch. I thought back over every moment I'd spent with him. Every time he'd forgotten his wallet when we went to dinner. Every vague answer when I asked about his job. The time he claimed he'd been in Chicago for a work trip. But Rebecca told me she hadn't seen a single picture, not even a receipt from the hotel. At the time, I brushed it off. But now, each memory slotted into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see. My gut had been right all along. I poured myself another coffee and sat in silence. The question wasn't whether this man was lying. It was how much Rebecca already knew. Did she know about the debt? About the eviction? The alias? Or was she completely in the dark, believing every word he fed her? The phone buzzed again. A message from Rebecca. Dinner tomorrow night? Evan wants to talk about the house again. I stared at the screen for a long while. The old me, the cautious father who didn't want to rock the boat, might have gone along, might have nodded politely, kept the peace, hoped she would see the truth herself in time. But that wasn't me anymore. I had the proof in black and white. And the longer I kept it from her, the deeper the knife would cut when the truth finally surfaced. That evening, I walked the halls of my home like a ghost. Each picture frame I passed reminded me of her innocence, of the life I tried to build for her. And now, she was tying herself to a man who had already destroyed his own name and was looking for someone else's to carry the burden. I knew what I had to do. I called David again. "Thank you," I said simply. "You might have just saved my daughter's future." "Henry," he said carefully, "be gentle with her. Love makes people blind. Sometimes they'd rather stay blind than face the truth." "I know," I said, "but blindness doesn't stop the train when it's coming down the tracks." When I hung up, I folded the report, slid it into a plain envelope, and placed it on the counter. Tomorrow, I would sit with Rebecca. I would hand it to her. And whether she hated me or thanked me, whether it broke her heart or spared it, she would know the truth. And Evan would know I wasn't a man who signed his name without reading the fine print. The next evening, Rebecca and Evan came over for dinner. I had set the table the way I always do. 2 candles, linen napkins, my wife's old china that I only bring out for special occasions. It wasn't because I wanted to celebrate. It was because I wanted to remind myself, and maybe Rebecca too, that some things in life are too precious to be treated lightly. Evan walked in with that polished smile of his, carrying a bottle of wine like a peace offering. Rebecca looked tired, shadows under her eyes, but she forced a smile as she kissed my cheek. I welcomed them both, carving roast beef while making small talk about the weather, the neighbor's new fence, anything but the storm that waited behind my lips. We sat, bowed our heads, and I said grace. My voice was steady, but my heart was already preparing for battle. Dinner began quietly. Evan complimented the meal. Rebecca laughed once or twice, but the air between us carried a weight none of us could ignore. Halfway through, I set my fork down. My chair creaked as I leaned back, and both of them looked at me, sensing the shift. Evan, I said, keeping my voice calm, I asked to see your credit report. You said you'd send it. You didn't, so I got it myself. His fork froze midair. Rebecca's eyes widened. The color drained from Evan's face faster than the wine in his glass. Sir, I can explain, he stammered. I slid the envelope across the table. You don't need to explain. It's all here. Rebecca reached for it first, her fingers trembling as she pulled the papers free. I watched her eyes scan line after line. Each word cut deeper. Late payments, collections, eviction, alias, fraud. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, Evan, what is this? He tried to smile, but it cracked under the weight of her gaze. It's not as bad as it looks. Some of those accounts weren't even mine. Mix-ups, old mistakes. I was going to fix it before I told you. Before you told her? I interrupted, my voice sharper now. Or before you tricked her into tying her name to yours? Dad, please, Rebecca whispered, tears welling. No, sweetheart, I said gently but firmly. This isn't just about love. This is about trust. And he's been hiding the truth. Evan slammed his hand on the table, startling us both. You don't understand. I love your daughter. I was trying to protect her from worrying. I just needed time. Protect her? I leaned forward, my voice low. Real protection doesn't come from lies. It comes from honesty, even when it hurts. Rebecca looked between us, her hand shaking as she held the report. Evan, tell me it's not true. Tell me these aren't your debts, your lies. His silence was louder than any confession. He lowered his head, staring at his plate. That silence broke something inside her. She pushed her chair back, stood up and whispered, I don't even know who you are. Evan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Rebecca, please. It's just money. We can figure it out. She shook her head, tears spilling now. It's not just money. It's trust. And you've already spent it all. The room went still. Only the clock on the wall ticked, steady and unrelenting. Evan finally stood, his face red with anger and shame. He looked at me with eyes full of resentment. You've ruined everything, he hissed. No, I said quietly. You ruined it when you chose deception over truth. He grabbed his coat, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, rattling the frames on the wall. Rebecca collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, I whispered. I know it hurts. She sobbed quietly, the kind of sobs that shake a body from the inside out. I let her cry, offering no words, because sometimes words are useless in the face of heartbreak. All I could give her was presence, the steady reminder that she wasn't alone. When she finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. She asked me the question I'd been dreading. Why didn't you trust me to see it myself? Why did you have to find out for me? I took a deep breath. Because, Rebecca, I couldn't risk you learning the truth when it was already too late. I'd rather you hate me now than suffer later. She stared at me for a long moment, hurt, conflicted, but somewhere in her eyes I saw a flicker of understanding. That night didn't end with hugs or forgiveness. It ended with silence. She went home alone, her heart broken, her world shaken. And me? I sat in the quiet, staring at the empty chairs across the table, knowing that sometimes a father's duty isn't to make his child happy, it's to keep them safe, even from themselves. The night after Evan stormed out, the house was silent again. Too silent. Even the tick of the clock on the wall felt heavier, louder, like it was counting down the seconds to something I couldn't yet see. I sat in my chair, staring at the empty table, and thought of Rebecca. She had left without hugging me, without saying much at all. And though I knew I had done what needed to be done, the ache in my chest told me I had wounded her too. The next morning, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen, and for a moment I hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, her voice was low, tired. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm here," I said gently. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, uneven. Finally, she said, "I didn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that report. Every line, every debt, every lie. I thought I knew him. Dad, I thought I knew who I was marrying." My throat tightened. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault." She let out a bitter laugh. "Isn't it? I chose him. I ignored the little things. The way he brushed off questions. The nights he came home late with excuses that never quite lined up. I told myself love was enough. And now I feel like a fool. I wanted to reach through the phone, to hold her, to shield her from the shame she was carrying. But some lessons can't be cushioned. They have to be lived through, even when they burn. "You're not a fool," I told her. "You're human. You wanted to believe in him. That's not weakness. It's love. But love without truth is like building a house on sand. It doesn't stand when the storm comes." She was quiet again. I could hear muffled sobs, then the sound of her blowing her nose. "I don't know what to do," she finally said. "Part of me wants to give him a chance to explain. Part of me wants to throw the ring at his feet and walk away." "You don't owe him forgiveness," I said softly. "And you don't owe him silence either. You owe yourself honesty. Whatever choice you make sure it's one you can live with when you look in the mirror years from now." That seemed to sit with her. "Can I come over?" she asked. "Always." An hour later, she arrived, eyes red, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing one of her old sweaters that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. She walked in without a word and collapsed onto the couch. I brought her tea, the way Linda used to when Rebecca was sick as a little girl. She wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into steam as though the answers might rise from it. "I loved him," she said finally, voice breaking. Or at least I thought I did. But now I keep asking myself, was it love, or was it just the idea of love? The dream of a wedding, a home, a family? Maybe I was in love with the picture, not the person. I nodded slowly. "That's a question only you can answer, Rebecca. But let me tell you something. The right man won't make you question your worth. He won't hide his past to keep you in the dark. He'll lay it bare, flaws and all, and ask you to walk with him anyway." Her eyes filled with tears again. "Do you think I'll ever find that?" I smiled sadly. "I think you already know you deserve it, and that's the first step." For the rest of the afternoon, we talked about her fears, her regrets, her anger. She confessed that part of her still wanted to believe Evan could change, that maybe love could fix him. I told her gently that love can inspire change, but it can't force it. A man has to want to change for himself, not for convenience, not for appearances, and certainly not just to secure a mortgage. By evening, she looked lighter, not healed. Healing never happens in a single day, but lighter. She hugged me before leaving, pressing her face into my shoulder like she used to when she was a child. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Even if I hate you a little right now, I know you did this because you love me." Her words pierced me, but they also gave me hope, because love mixed with anger still has roots. It means she hasn't shut me out. It means we'll find our way through this together. After she left, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The world was quiet again, but not heavy this time. More like a pause between chapters. I knew the hardest part wasn't over yet. Rebecca would still have to face Evan, still have to make the choice herself. All I could do was stand beside her, steady and unyielding, while she found her strength. Sometimes being a father isn't about fixing things. It's about being the ground beneath your child's feet when the world around them starts to shake. And that's what I intended to be, for as long as she needed me. It didn't take long before Evan came back around. Men like him rarely let go easily. A week after the confrontation at my table, Rebecca told me he'd been calling, sending messages, even showing up at her apartment unannounced. She ignored him at first, but persistence wears down even the strongest walls, and finally she agreed to meet him at a cafe in public where she felt safe. She asked me if I wanted to come. I told her no. This was her fight to face. But I promised her I'd be waiting when it was done, no matter the outcome. That afternoon, she sat across from him at a corner table. Later, she told me how it went, but in my mind, I can see it clearly. Evan, with his polished smile, roses tucked under one arm, tried to play the part of a man who just made a simple mistake. "Rebecca," he began, his voice soft, practiced. "I should have told you about the debt. I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to see me as a failure." She listened quietly, hands folded in her lap. He went on, piling excuse on excuse. Childhood struggles, bad luck, unfair landlords, greedy creditors. Everyone else's fault but his own. Finally, she cut him off. "Evan, I don't care that you failed. Everyone fails. I care that you lied. Over and over. You didn't give me the chance to love you through it. You just tried to cover it up and drag me into it blind." He blinked, caught off guard by her firmness. "I was protecting you," he insisted. She shook her head. "No, you were protecting yourself. There's a difference." When he realized she wasn't softening, the mask slipped, his tone sharpened. "You'll never find someone who loves you like I do. You'll regret this. Your father poisoned you against me." But Rebecca didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and said, "My father didn't poison me. He saved me. And if you think love looks like deception, then you never loved me at all." With that, she stood, left the roses on the table, and walked out. I was waiting at home when she arrived. She came through the door, shoulders slumped, tears brimming. For a moment, she just stood there, silent. Then she walked into my arms, and I held her the way I had when she was a child with scraped knees. "It's over," she whispered into my chest. I kissed the top of her head. "Good. Now you can begin again." The days that followed weren't easy. Ending an engagement never is. Friends asked questions. Relatives whispered. She returned the ring, boxed up his things, and erased his number from her phone. Each step was painful, but each step was also freedom. One evening, she came over with a small cardboard box. Inside were photos of her and Evan, smiles frozen in time, memories that now felt false. She set the box on my kitchen counter and said, "I don't know what to do with these." I looked at her and said, "You don't have to decide today. Healing isn't about rushing. Leave the box. When you're ready, you'll know." She nodded, relief softening her features. Sometimes the permission not to decide is the greatest gift you can give someone who's hurting. Weeks passed. Slowly, she began to reclaim herself. She joined a book club, took weekend trips with friends, picked up painting again, something she hadn't done since college. And though the hurt lingered, it no longer defined her. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies, she turned to me and said, "Dad, thank you for not signing, for not letting me walk blindfolded into a trap." I smiled faintly. That's what fathers do. "Rebecca, we stand in front of the fire, even if our children get mad at the smoke." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time since this all began, I felt peace settle in. The storm had passed. There were still clouds on the horizon, but the worst was behind us. Evan disappeared not long after, moved out of state, according to someone who'd heard from a friend, and that was fine by me. His absence was the best gift he could leave us. As for Rebecca, she grew stronger, not just because she let go of him, but because she had faced the truth head-on and survived it. And I had kept my promise. The one I made to myself the day she was born. To protect her, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. The night I watched her walk to her car, head held high, I whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for the pain, but for the strength that came from it. Because sometimes, the hardest endings are the ones that finally give us back our beginnings. And that, I knew, was a true gift of this whole ordeal. Life has a way of moving forward, even when we think we can't. The weeks after Rebecca ended things with Evan were heavy, yes, but they weren't hopeless. I watched her step carefully out of the wreckage, like someone learning to walk across broken glass. Every step hurt, but every step also carried her closer to safety. She called me more often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes just to sit in silence on the other end of the line. That silence was its own kind of healing, proof that she still wanted me close, even if the words weren't there yet. One Sunday, she came over carrying groceries. "Thought I'd cook for you," she said with a shy smile. The last time she'd done that was years ago, back when Linda was still alive. We cooked together, chicken, rice, and vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it filled the house with warmth. As we ate, she laughed at something I said, really laughed, and for a moment, I saw the girl she had been before all this. That spark was still inside her. Over time, her questions changed. No longer, why did he lie? Or what did I do wrong? But what's next of me? And how do I trust again? I told her the truth. You trust slowly. You watch for actions, not words. And you remember that someone who really loves you will never make you carry their lies. She nodded, quiet but thoughtful. It wasn't easy for her. There were nights she still cried, mornings she still woke with a weight in her chest. Healing isn't a straight line, but she was moving forward. And as her father, that was all I could hope for. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink low, she turned to me. "Do you ever regret not saying yes? What if he had changed, Dad? What if you had given him the chance?" I thought about it, about the slim possibility that Evan could have turned his life around, that love might have steadied his hand. But then I looked at her, stronger now, her eyes clearer than they had been in months, and I said, "No, because love built on lies isn't love at all. It's a trap, and you deserve freedom, not chains disguised as promises." She smiled faintly, and I knew she understood. Weeks turned into months. Evan faded into the past, little more than a painful memory, a warning etched into her heart. And Rebecca began to shine again. She took up painting, joined a hiking group, even started talking about traveling, something she'd always dreamed of but never dared to do. Watching her reclaim her life was like watching spring break through after a brutal winter. And me? I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. Not because the storm had never come, but because we had weathered it together. Still, I couldn't shake the urge to write one more letter. Not for her eyes today, but for some future day when she might need it more. So I sat at my desk, pulled out my pen, and began. "Dear Rebecca, you may not read this today. You may not read it for years. But one day, when the world feels heavy again and you doubt your own strength, I hope these words find you. I know what it feels like to love someone who doesn't deserve it. I know the shame of ignoring the signs, the pain of realizing trust was misplaced. You've lived through that now, and I wish I could have spared you. But life doesn't work that way. Life teaches through scars. What I want you to remember is this. Scars are proof that you survived. They are not marks of weakness. They are marks of endurance. Evan may have lied. He may have broken your trust. But he did not break you. You stood up. You walked away. You chose truth over illusion. And that choice makes you stronger than you know. One day, you will love again. And when you do, you will do it with eyes wide open, with a heart wiser than before. Don't let fear keep you from that. Fear is a thief of joy. Trust yourself again, because you've earned it. And know this. My love for you has no conditions, no fine print, no signature required. It is yours freely, always, in every breath I take. With all my love, Dad, When I finished writing, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my cufflinks. Maybe she'll find it someday, maybe she won't. But the act of writing it was enough. Sometimes words don't need an audience. Sometimes they just need to exist, steady and waiting. That night, as I turned off the porch light, I thought about all the parents out there watching their children walk into futures they can't control. It's the hardest part of love, letting go while still holding on. But maybe that's what makes it real. If you're listening to this tonight, maybe you've faced something similar. Maybe you've had to tell the hard truth, or hear it, or carry it. Maybe you've been the one to sign the paper, or the one who walked away before the ink dried. Wherever you are, I want you to remember this. Trust isn't a gift. It's a choice. And it should never be given to someone who hides in shadows. Protect yourself. Protect the people you love. And never be afraid to listen when your gut tells you the truth. Because in the end, love without honesty is nothing but a cage. And freedom, my friends, is worth everything.